What is up, y'all? Welcome back to episode 82 of That's No Moon Pod. Now that the Acolyte has come and gone, I think it's only right to kind of deep dive a little more about what the show has done, what the show accomplished, and also just overall kind of ruin certain things to certain fans. And I kind of just want to give my overall thoughts on what I think Disney, Lucasfilm, and just the Acolyte in general, what it's sort of done to the community and the fan base. As you all may know by now, that Darth Plagueis showed up. We got a small look at Yoda at the end of the last episode. And there's just been so much talk about things breaking canon, certain choices that were made in the show that contradict certain things that were already set in stone in canon by Disney as well, whether it's comic books or novels or just the prequels in general. But I kind of just want to go over the overall vibe on what's kind of been going on recently, just now that the dust is settled and people are kind of done with the show, and just how things have just been so chaotic and just toxic within the community and the fan base. I go on Twitter and I see certain accounts that post the Acolyte in a good sense, and they seem to be praising the show for what it's done and what the show gave them. And I find myself to be in the opposite camp, to where, I mean, if you like the show, that's great. That's awesome. For those people that like it, I'm happy for y'all. But The Acolyte to me was just something that came and went, and I felt like it was just another Disney Star Wars project that felt lackluster in its writing, in its directing, in its cinematography, in its score, in its acting choices. There was just a lot of things that just seemed to follow the blueprint for whatever Disney's focus is with Star Wars. I've recently watched the prequels and the original trilogy after the series finale, or the season finale, I should say. And you could say it's just due to nostalgia, or just the fact that, I grew up on watching the original trilogy and the prequels as a kid and loving them for what they were. And those movies will never get old to me. I could watch them multiple times a year and still find that certain joy that the movies have always given me. And when I watch those movies and I just look at what Disney's Star Wars has given us, to me, there's just no comparison on the feelings that I get while watching the OG movies. And I don't know if it's just something that only George Lucas can give us with his writing and just his overall storytelling, but there's just so many things that have been missing with these newer Star Wars projects that we've been getting. And again, all the things that I had mentioned was the writing, directing, cinematography, the score. I just don't understand how some people are okay with these shows just being so mid, and especially for the budget that The Acolyte had, $180 million. I would expect to be getting some crazy cinematography, some epic shots, a great sounding score, a memorable one at that, at least, and the dialogue, some good moments to where certain actors may have a crazy good monologue or something like that, but there has been zero of any of those things. Besides Andor, I feel like Andor really had some great cinematography and a lot of great dialogue, but for whatever reason, they just continue to pump out these shows that just don't feel like they have a whole lot of integrity. And there's just so much things that don't make sense in The Acolyte to me, to where it's like they have to do some sort of damage control once the show wraps up just for certain things to seem like they make sense within the universe and what's already been pre-established. Obviously, Darth Plagueis showing up at the end and him possibly learning how to create life through the Force from these witches from where Osha and May grew up on. It just seems like they threw him in there just to throw him in there to hopefully get a season two, or for wanting people to want a season two in general, when really you should use Plagueis in a way that fits the overall story that you're already trying to tell, instead of trying to bait people into wanting a second season of your show. And it just seems like a cop out to me. It seems like a desperate plea on trying to hook the fans into wanting more of this. But I just really think it is a detriment to Star Wars and to these characters that we already know, we already love. I see a lot of controversy as well, talking about Yoda and how Vanestra is pretty much going to go tell Yoda what happened, or possibly lie to Yoda like she did to all those senators and whatnot about Soul going crazy and killing all these Jedi by himself. And either they're going to make Yoda buy into it and be completely oblivious to the story that Vanestra is going to tell him, or possibly he's in on it as well and decides to go with Vanestra and go along with her story and just to completely, brush it under the rug and act like none of this ever happened for the next 100 or so years until we see him in the prequels. Because people point out that, yeah, Yoda has hid certain things from people before in the prequels, specifically about the clone army and how he didn't want to let any of these senators or whatnot know that this clone army was made and approved by a Jedi, Sifo Dyas, who was dead already, but he decided to go along with not telling certain people about this whole situation, which is valid for some people to bring that point up. But again, I just think you're just treading into this water that it's a dangerous way to go because you're just running the risk of, again, making certain characters that we already know of seem like they're acting out of character or possibly just not making sense at all for who this character is already. And I just see a lot of the discourse going back and forth on the show on everything I just said. And again, just getting back to what I was talking about with these shows just feeling so mid and not having the integrity that I would expect Star Wars to be treated with, and especially with $180 million budget. I would expect some epic scores running throughout the whole series, some Roger Deakins esque cinematography shots, and some at least Andor style dialogue and monologues going on throughout the show. But The Acolyte literally had none of that. There were some cool scenes here and there. The lightsaber battles I thought were a step above what we've gotten from Disney so far, at least. And I think that includes the sequel trilogies as well. That was always something that I really didn't understand from the sequel trilogy, to where I just felt like a lot of the lightsaber fights were just so unmemorable. And I know people always go to the throne room scene in The Last Jedi, but even that sort of has some flaws to me, which is when it comes to the choreography in general. But the scene was definitely cool. But again, I feel like that's the only scene that people go to regarding the sequel trilogy and the lightsaber fights. Um, there's been this whole thing going around about Osha and her ability to bleed Soul's lightsaber, turning it red, and how in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin is over here doing all these crazy things, killing younglings and killing all these Jedi in the Jedi Temple, and yet his lightsaber remained blue throughout the whole movie. So why didn't Anakin's lightsaber turn red, but yet Osha gets pissed off at Soul because he admitted to killing her mother, and just like that, she's able to bleed the crystal red. And from what Disney has apparently said, it was because part of the crystal was sticking out of the lightsaber because it was broken, quote unquote, from when it was thrown. So the fact that Osha's skin was touching this kyber crystal poking out of the saber, and through her anger and hatred towards Soul, she was able to bleed the kyber crystal like that, just by her skin touching a portion of this kyber crystal. That's how the lightsaber turns red, apparently. And this is what I was saying, to where it just seems like they try to get cute and they try to throw in certain things that have already been pre-established in Disney canon, mind you. And after the show wraps up, they have to do all this damage control just to try to make certain things that they threw in the show to make sense. And to me, I feel like that's just how you know that these writers, showrunners, and producers don't have a grasp on what Star Wars is and what's already been pre established beforehand. Leslie Headland has been doing, seems like, a lot of interviews lately now that the show's wrapped up, regarding just the Acolyte in general and the hopes of there being a season two. And some of her comments definitely didn't sit well with me. Uh, she was talking about there being a season two and how, of course, she wants there to be a season two. And I think just the more and more that she talks and the more and more interviews that she does, I just feel like, to me, it doesn't do her justice and it doesn't do her show justice. And some of the points that she had made and some of the questions that were asked, she pretty much responded with, well, it's my show and she could pretty much do whatever the hell she wants, which she's not wrong. But I feel like at the end of the day, if you're going to have these sort of responses and you're trying to make sense of what should be pretty obvious on screen, and if it's not making sense and you're going to have to do all these interviews and answer all these questions on certain things to try to make them make sense, I think that's just a given that your show wasn't well written enough and it wasn't as well thought out as you may have thought it was. And again, it just goes back to, I don't get what they're doing. I don't get their mindsets on these projects that Disney's greenlighting with the budget that it was given. We have Skeleton Crew coming out later this year, and it's supposed to have like this Goonies vibe to it. I'm guessing it's going to be more of a kid show and not as dark as we were hoping that The Acolyte was going to be. Um, so it could just be one of those shows that's already failed from the get go before the shows even came out yet. And it sucks that the show's going to be already trying to like get back into this place of good graces from the fans after what the Acolyte had done already. I'm just hoping that we can finally get to this point to where Star Wars just has that old school feeling again. Because when I watched the OG movies, there's just this feeling that I get, and it's almost unexplainable, but there's just certain emotions that I feel, and things just seem to work for me that I think Disney just doesn't have any idea on how to recreate any of those emotions or feelings that those OG movies brought. Because even in the Clone Wars animated show, you feel that. I think Rogue One was somehow able to get pretty close to what the original movies felt like. I think Rogue One kind of had that magic to it in a sense to where it still felt like a modern Star Wars movie, but obviously it's taken place in the timeline to where it was right before A New Hope. But they could have easily Disneyfied that whole movie and made it seem like it wasn't in that certain timeline. But Rogue One to me was able to accomplish what most of these Disney projects have failed to do. I think Mando season one and season two did a great job of capturing that magic. And I'm just I'm hoping that Star Wars can just get back on track because the Acolyte in a way could be a blessing in disguise to where if you're Bob Iger and you're looking at the response that this show has gotten, even though there are the fans out there that seem to absolutely love the Acolyte and are completely okay with all the choices that were made, can brush over any possible canon breaking or lore breaking choices that were made. They can completely disregard the writing and the acting and just certain things that to me don't make any sense at all, but somehow they found joy in all that. But if you're Bob Iger, you got to look at the majority of the fans because I feel like the majority of the fans did not vibe with the show. And I've talked about this in other episodes before to where it seems like Disney's really losing a grasp on fans like me and fans that grew up with Star Wars but feel like now that they're a little bit older, they're starting to get that thought in their mind to where maybe I'm just growing out of it. Maybe Star Wars just isn't for me anymore. And I feel like that is absolutely the worst possible outcome for this fandom to lose people that have loved this franchise and certain projects just come out and they slowly start to not care anymore. They're not feeling like they need to tune in week to week and just can completely brush over anything that's been given from Disney Star Wars lately. But just to hear those certain things from people, because I've heard that from multiple people now that are either just completely not wanting to watch the show in general, have no interest in it, which is crazy because before you would think there's a new Star Wars project, a new Star Wars anything, people are going to be wanting to see it, wanting to get their hands on it as soon as possible. And those fans that just seem like they feel like they're getting too old for it or they're growing out of it or it's just not for them anymore. I think that's just so sad because I could never feel like that. I could never imagine myself even thinking anything like that because there's so many other franchises and IP that have been with me since I was a child and have stuck with me to this day. And I think just certain characters and certain movies, TV shows, whatever you want, those things should never leave you. And those thoughts should never cross your mind to where maybe I'm just too old for this. Of course, we grow out of certain things. That's just part of growing up. But things like Star Wars, Marvel, DC, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, whatever you want to call it, those certain things should be handled with certain care to protect the integrity and to protect the fan base and the core fan base that these different franchises have accumulated over the years and have just done so much for so many people throughout the world. And until Disney and Lucasfilm make some sort of change internally, because clearly it's not the fan base growing out of this. It's not all these trolls or people that are quote unquote review bombing these shows. That has nothing to do with the reviews and the response that these shows and movies have been getting from Disney and Lucasfilm. Clearly, it's something internal and something needs to change because right now they're on the brink of just completely losing the fan base in general. And I think they really need to look in the mirror and stop acting like what they're doing is working and actually try to revamp their producers, their writers, their showrunners, and just their overall creative direction that they're going. And they need to step outside the box and actually try to put some integrity on what they're doing because just the more and more as time goes on, it just seems like they have no idea what they're doing. And I'm sure they probably think that what they have been doing is working for them, but I think the Acolyte was something that really kind of helped show them, hopefully, that this ain't it and something's got to change. And I'm hoping a change comes sooner rather than later because I just want Star Wars to make me feel like how I feel when watching the prequels and the original trilogy, or at least come close to it. It's not going to have, obviously, the same nostalgic feeling, but there are ways to just create that magic again. And again, I'm just hoping that that comes sooner rather than later. I think Andor season 2 will definitely help cure this whole Star Wars hangover I feel like that we've been living in. But until that comes out, I feel like we're just going to be living in this weird twilight zone of just the fandom going back and forth on thinking who's right and who's wrong. you just see so many toxic comments and just tweets and just overall responses going on back and forth on socials. And it's crazy how just the reaction that the Acolyte has gotten and how it's kind of done a lot of people in certain ways wonders for their view counts and their subscriptions on YouTube and whatnot. It's gotten a lot of engagement, clearly. But I'm just hoping that Disney sees all this. And I don't think we're getting a season two of The Acolyte, no matter what Leslie Headland says or wants. I think just the way that the reaction from the show has gotten, I don't think there's any sort of way that Disney approves a season two of the show. I feel like we probably would have already gotten some kind of word on that by now, but right now I think Star Wars needs to focus on what they got coming up already announced instead of announcing something again that will probably end up getting canned down the line, just like so many other projects have been during Kathleen Kennedy's reign as the producer of Lucasfilm. So I think there's little to no chance that The Acolyte gets a season two, and I think they're just going to be focusing on the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, Andor season two, and I guess the Rey movie, if that's still even going to happen, but it's looking like it is. Obviously, we're still getting these Dave Filoni movies down the line. Ahsoka season two supposedly still coming out, which I think they obviously have to do to tie into Dave Filoni's movies. But let me know what y'all think of just what's going on throughout the fan base. Do y'all want a season two of The Acolyte? Do you not want a season two? Let me know down below y'all's thoughts, y'all's opinions. Like, comment, subscribe. Deadpool and Wolverine later this week, which I'm super pumped on. Gonna be doing a full spoiler review next week once I see it. So be on the lookout for that. But until next week, y'all stay safe, and I'll catch y'all on the flip. Peace.